Here are some treasures that you let fall, said Aragorn. You'll be glad to have them back. He loosened his belt from under his cloak and took from it the 2 sheathed knives. Well, said Merry, I never expected to see those again. I marked a few orcs with mine, but Ugluk took them from us. And here also is your brooch, Pippin, said Aragorn. I've kept it safe, for it's a very precious thing. I know, said Pippin. It was a wrench to let it go, but what else could I do? Nothing else, answered Aragorn. One who cannot cast away a treasure at need is in fetters. You did rightly.
Welcome to the Wayward Wizards podcast. This week we are reading Book 3, Chapter 9, Flotsam and Jetsam. My name is Zach.
My name's Logan.
We got ourselves another in-betweener here this week, Logan. 15 pages, just another transition, a little short chapter.
Yeah, it's like a Greek chorus chapter.
Yeah, you said that about Helm's Deep. There was like a section where you said it was like a Greek chorus when they're kind of like recounting something that has just happened kind of off the page.
Mm-hmm.
A character is kind of like recounting it and telling the story that way. I was really struck by that this time, how basically that's this entire chapter. Once they are reunited and kind of do like a little catch up, a lot of it is things that we already know. It's just them like telling each other what's happened in the previous 9 days or however long it says it was in the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, one of the hobbits says, "Oh, it's only been 9 days, even though it feels like a year." And you and I have been talking about these like 9 days for like several months at this point. So
yeah,
it's
that's
like,
true.
Yeah, it does feel like a year, doesn't it? But yeah, it's just an interesting way of presenting the action. I think it's so counter to like modern storytelling. I mean, basically, I'd forgotten that we get the beginning of the marching of the Ents, but then it just cuts to the other set of characters, and we don't actually see the downfall of Isengard from like a narrator telling us what's happening in the moment.
Yeah, Merry and Pippin become the narrator, right? It's almost like that, like whatever, like cinematic technology didn't exist yet or something.
Yeah.
Like maybe Tolkien wouldn't have thought to like have like concurrent scenes happening,
Yeah.
like in different places. But my sense is that more chronological storytelling.
Yeah.
And then if you want to tell something that happened at the same time, somebody has to relate it, to another character. It's probably came first. I like this chapter better than the last one, I think.
Mm-hmm. Just because we get the Hobbit personalities, the Hobbit voice.
Yeah, I think that's part of why, is because I really love hearing from Merry and Pippin, and in particular, and they're so, kind of lighthearted, even when they're telling about this. Yeah. Sort of like almost like a natural disaster happens to Isengard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like a cataclysm, but they're still kind of like, even though like, they said that they had to like lay down and cover their ears through part of it. They're still sort of,
they almost drown at one point. Like Treebeard says like, "Hey, don't get yourself caught like in any of these tunnels, because
you might die."
And then they're like, "Yeah, we almost died. Like the water rose up and we had to like climb through the rubble and we barely made it out as a tight squeeze."
But they just kind of bop along, they were so lighthearted. And so I really love that. And I love I got really emotional actually when they talk about Gandalf showing up, and I don't know, it's enjoyable in a way.
I love the way that the hobbits take on kind of this almost like faux courtly tone. Like when they're talking about like the food that they've procured, the provender, they're like, we hope that this suffices for you, lords. They have this like kind of like, you can tell it's not their normal voice, but it's not, it's also just like so much their personality. And it's like Treebeard asks them to greet the train that's coming up because he doesn't know how to talk to kings. They've been given this task of like speaking in a courtly tone, and now they're kind of playing it up now that it's just them and their close friends. But they're kind of still keeping up that that role, which I just
Right.
thought it was really hilarious to see.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that Treebeard says, "You probably know something about how to talk to kings," and then he kind of says, like, "I've met a few, kings, but I never like bothered to like learn their names even."
So Treebeard. And he's like, I don't even know what they eat really. So like, if you can get some human food for 25, that would be great.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love it. I don't know. It's sort of a fun chapter, I think.
I think so. I mean, I texted you yesterday that I kind of didn't like it. I mean, to me, it's just this chapter and last, I feel like could have been just a much shorter, dialogue. It could even just be like, and then they told each other everything that had happened from their point of view, and then they rejoiced and ate food. But it's got that slower tone. Tolkien always talked about how his favorite thing about writing this was the Hobbit speech, like the Hobbit interactions, the way that the Hobbits interacted with each other. He called it hobbitry. A lot of his readers, including C.S. Lewis, were always encouraging him to cut a lot of that and just kind of move the story forward. There's whole chapters of there's whole chapters of the draft history, which is like, if you're watching on YouTube, behind me on the left side of your, over my left shoulder, there are whole chapters of just this type of dialogue, just over and over and over again. He loved writing this stuff. I think it came really naturally to him. There's like a whole scene in the beginning of the story when he was still kind of finding his footing, figuring out what the story was, when the hobbits are just talking about how they would never want to live in a second story of a house because they wouldn't know how to get the dishes from upstairs back downstairs. And one of the hobbits starts speculating that they could make their plates out of wood so they could just throw it out the window and then pick it up out of the grass. And so you can just imagine like Clive just like reading through the drafts, just being like, oh my God, Tolkien.
That's the kind of stuff that I love, from like British comedies and TV shows and stuff that I used to watch on PBS when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I love that stuff. I just, that sort of like repartee or whatever. I guess Tolkien probably wouldn't have described it that way with a French word, but
he would have hated using a French word. Heck, man.
But just that back and forth, and like, it's a cultural thing. Like, people know how to enter into that kind of like back and forth because there's sort of a defined role. Like, you're sort of the one person is kind of the straight man and the other person is telling jokes, but everybody's in on the joke. Yeah. That's the hobbitry thing that I love.
And that's what like normal life is actually like. We're doing that right now,
Yeah, exactly. Like, people know how to listen to a conversation.
Nothing life or death is happening between you and I right now, but it would make a really terrible novel.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we've talked about tonal shifts a bunch on the pod. I think the tonal shift between the Helm's Deep chapters and even just the chase. The chase itself is really harrowing and exciting. It would be terrible to live through it. Like, you and I both would just be peeing our pants if we had to be at the Battle of Helm's Deep. We would be useless.
Absolutely.
But it makes for good reading. I don't know. The dialogue heavy part of this is like kind of like, but that's, the tonal shift. I think you mentioned last episode, I'd never really thought of it that way, which is that maybe Tolkien just kind of has this intuitive sense of like when you need to pump the brakes and kind of bring things back to the ground level and remind yourself that these are human characters with, basic needs like eating and drinking and smoking.
There is a genre of fantasy that is all Helm's Deep all the time, and it's like this grim, dark, fantasy.
Yeah.
Where it's just very in the mud and guts and blood for 300 pages.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, I've enjoyed those novels, but I think it very rarely, ascends to anything above pretty standard genre fiction.
All right, you want to jump in?
Let's do it, dog.
Did you Google the words or like look up the words Flotsam and Jetsam?
No, I did not. I only looked with the word moisty to see if it was just a Tolkien.
I'm so glad that you mentioned moisty. Misty moisty.
Moisty.
I had that written down.
I assume he just invented that on the spot, sort of like a Shakespeare would have done.
100%.
Yeah.
But I looked up Flotsam and Jetsam. I've looked it up before and I'd kind of forgotten what exactly they were. I knew that they were kind of just like words for like detritus, like they're
Yeah.
just kind of like, you know, the stuff left over after like this and that, you know, it's like stuff that's like left over after. But I looked them up and they're nautical terms. Flotsam is something that happens after a shipwreck.
Mm.
And so it's like the stuff that's like floating on top of the water after a ship goes down.
Yeah.
And jetsam is stuff that is thrown off to like lessen the weight of a ship, like during a battle, especially if the ship is like going down. They'll like start throwing stuff off the side of the ship to save the ship.
Yeah, I think I kind of intuitively knew what flotsam was, but jetsam I couldn't have told you. But you're jettisoning.
Yeah, you're throwing stuff off to like keep the ship afloat. Like if there's like a storm or something like that, you would throw off anything that's completely unnecessary just to survive.
Yeah.
If your ship's too heavy and you get pulled under, or like if there's some sort of like event or battle or whatever and your ship is sinking, you want to keep it afloat as long as possible.
Yeah.
The way to do that is you lessen the weight. Yeah, it's interesting because you have this like kind of like water, you know, waste left over after they flood the bowl of Isengard with water. So it's got this like nautical, like it's like a naval battle.
Yeah, at one point it describes Isengard as a pan full of water, or a pan full of liquid.
Oh, really?
I think that was in there. Yeah, and
I missed that, but I'm sure we'll come up against
yeah, it's definitely, you know, marshy almost.
Yeah.
Thinking of it as completely full of water, I think, is the right way to think of it.
Yeah, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the title names are a little bit slept on, I think.
I agree. Yeah.
We don't usually go into detail talking about why he chose the names for the chapters that he did, but there's some really interesting ones.
Yeah, Flotsam and Jetsam is, I think, a really evocative one.
Yeah. So we kind of pick up right where we left off. You know, last chapter was the reunion of all these characters who have been, you know, sundered and have gone off on their own paths, and now there's kind of the road is kind of like converged again, and they meet. So last chapter was when they meet again, and you got Gimli calling them like, you know, woolly-footed truants and all that. Yeah, which is such a great word.
I think comes up again here.
Yeah, truants. The truants. But this is where I think the emotional payoff really comes to fruit. Basically, the first few pages are this them each recounting what has happened to them in the last 9 or 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
And most of it is stuff that we already know from like kind of their individual point of view chapters. There's not a lot that is like revealed in what they're telling, at least to us, in what they're telling each other. And the three hunters at least have been able to kind of piece together a really accurate timeline of what happened to them. The main thing I think that we learn a lot about is the march of the Ents on Isengard and exactly what happened while the Battle of Helm's Deep was happening that we didn't get to see before.
Yeah, I really like the details we get about like the way that the Huorns move.
Yeah,
as like a mist.
Yeah, they like cloud themselves, and
they like cloud themselves. You don't just get to see them move, but it still remains pretty mysterious about like, are they walking or are they gliding or are they what exactly is happening?
It's creepy stuff,
and they're way creepier than the Ents. The Ents seem way more like people, you know, because they walk and, you know, they're big tree guys, but they're sort of familiar. But the Huorns are more, I don't know, mysterious and creepy than Ents for sure.
Absolutely. There's some great descriptions, which I think we'll probably read when we get closer. But they're basically like, all right, yeah, we'll fill each other in on what happens, but first of all, we got to get some food. And Merry and Pippin are like, hey, we got you, dog.
We got food.
Like, not only do we have food, but the Ents said to get food for 25 people, but they didn't mention anything about drink. So
yeah, we got beer and wine.
And tobacco. Which
that's right, yeah.
Tobacco. They used the word tobacco. I think this is the first time that I've seen the word tobacco used in Lord of the Rings. Usually they call it pipeweed.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
it says that Merry produced a small leather bag full of tobacco.
Wow, interesting.
I think it's referred to as tobacco in The Hobbit, but not in Lord of the Rings because it was kind of his way of making it something that's supposed to be like indigenous to Europe, even though in actual history it was something that was made in North America.
Yeah, it's one of the few things that, along with, I guess, potatoes, but it's not many things that Tolkien kind of imports, from the New World, so to speak. But to use the word tobacco, I wonder if he just really wanted to underline that this is tobacco.
Maybe. I think I think it's a pretty good guess.
It seems strange that he wouldn't just, keep it as pipe weed.
Yeah. There are definitely several anachronisms that find their way into this text, which is, it's supposed to be like a few thousand years ago, but the hobbits have like, clocks on their mantelpieces.
Waistcoats.
And they have, handkerchiefs and, so there's definitely like little anachronisms. Like I think is it in the first chapter that says that something made the noise like a freight train, so there's like little things like this where it's like, all right, if this is supposed to be written by the hobbits, then, these are words that they couldn't have used or wouldn't have used. But tobacco is an interesting one. But they provide their guests with provender. And here's what I mean earlier when I talked about how they have kind of this courtly, like almost like ironic courtly tone.
Mm-hmm.
They go, "And you need not turn up your nose at the provender, Master Gimli," said Merry. "This is not orc stuff, but man food, as Treebeard calls it. Will you have wine or beer? There's a barrel inside there, very passable. And this is first-rate salted pork. Or I can cut you some rashers of bacon and broil them if you like. I am sorry there is no green stuff. The deliveries have been rather interrupted in the last few days. I cannot offer you anything to follow but butter and honey for your bread. Are you content?" "Indeed, yes," said Gimli. "The score is much reduced." So before he was just like, "Hey, like you owe us because we've been chasing after your furry little feet for the last, few days, and all we've had in reward was exhaustion and hunger and battle and a sore head."
Yeah.
And so I love their give and take.
Yeah, I like that the hunters are sort of playing at being a little put out.
Yeah. It's like you've been bad hosts.
Even though they're like all relieved and I think thrilled to see each other.
100%.
But they still have that. And that's kind of I think that's a little bit of hobbitry on the part of, even like Gimli and Legolas too.
They're playing into it.
Aragorn's a little bit less, he's just more staid. Yeah. But Gimli and Legolas certainly, are almost like, it's like they're cousins or brothers or something with the hobbits.
You said that Aragorn is a little more staid, but he's not speaking in the these and thous that he was in the last couple chapters.
That's true. And
he's back to Strider mode.
Yeah. Merry or Pippin sort of recognize him as Strider when he leans back and smokes his pipe. They're like, "Oh, it's Strider." And he's like, "Yeah, indeed."
"Hey, baby, it's like we're back in the Prancing Pony."
And he says something like, "Actually, I'm all these things. I belong to you, and I belong to being Strider, and I belong to the North, and I belong to Gondor.
I'm both Strider and Dunedain," he says.
And again, I think that shows that Aragorn is just not just a flat character. He's as complicated as anybody in the book. So,
but Merry and Pippin, they're like, we had they just kind of allude to the fact that they didn't eat very well and weren't treated very well under the orcs.
Mm-hmm.
And Aragorn says, "It does not seem to have done you any harm. Indeed, you look in the bloom of health." And then Gimli says, "Why, your hair is twice as thick and curly as when we parted, and I would swear that you have both grown somewhat, if that is possible for hobbits of your age." So that's the power that Ent drop, baby.
Does Gimli talk about other people's hair more than other characters? or am I just
He notices those things, doesn't he?
Am I just projecting that into the text? I'm not sure. Yeah, I really like this part where they've physically grown because they've been drinking the Ent drink, and Legolas puts together that the reason they actually have grown because,
he's like, we sing songs about this, like famous Ent draught.
But it's funny that Legolas can because Legolas has never seen an Ent. He's kind of shocked at some point. He's sort of like, "Oh, like for real, Ents.
Yeah.
And
He's like, I've never walked through those forests. Yeah.
right. But it's kind of cool that Legolas is like putting together. He's like, oh, all those myths were true.
Yeah.
They weren't just songs. They're based on something true, which, we've talked about that as part of the thesis, or the working idea of Lord of the Rings for Tolkien.
Every time I see it, I kind of mark it and put in breaking next to it in my margins.
Yeah, I like that.
It's like the movement of myth from story into a memory of things that were, like something that's a vehicle for truth. Whenever characters are like, oh, I thought that was just a legend, a wise character is like, oh, well, the old wives' tales that you're talking about, guess what? Old wives have wisdom.
I really like the way you put that. In breaking is really a descriptive way to talk about. It's like something moving from myth into reality. It just sort of like interrupts your expectations, right? That like, this is just a story. It's like, no, it's not just a story.
Yeah, there's no such thing as just a story. And I think that was part of Tolkien's like academic project of his life. Let's get back to the tobacco though, because there's a couple things going on here. One, I think it's there's some really clever like characterization going on here. Like Merry produces the tobacco, but Gimli's like, don't have a pipe. Lost it back in Moria or someplace. But then Pippin's like, half a moment. And he starts patting around his, doing the like checking for his car keys thing. And he's like, I knew I had this. He pulls out like an envelope, and in the envelope is like a spare pipe.
Yeah. He says it's more precious to him than rings.
Oh, great. And he goes, it's unused. I've carried it a long way, though I don't know why. I never really expected to find any pipe weed on the journey when my own ran out, but now it comes in useful after all. And then he goes, does that settle the score between us? And Gimli's like, settle it, most noble hobbit, it leaves me deep in your debt. So Gimli's carrying around the Book of Mirazabul all over creation. Aragorn's carrying around a couple extra knives, like just in case he meets the hobbits.
And that broken sword for so long too, right?
Yeah, it's just like what you carry on your journey. It's such a clever way of like communicating like who a person is. And so I think there's some really subtle like characterization going on here that just paints a picture of who these guys are. And over time, they've become like real people in our minds. And I think that's part of why is because of this really clever work that's going on. But the other thing that the tobacco is doing is it sets up the fact that Saruman has been trading in the north.
Yeah.
And his presence there is insidious, and it shows that he has been doing his dirty work in the Shire, which really sets up the Scouring of the Shire chapter at the very end of the book. Gimli takes the tobacco that he's been given, he like rubs it in his hands and smells it. He says it feels good and it smells good, and Mary's like, it is good. My dear Gimli, it is Longbottom leaf. How it came here I can't imagine. For Saruman's private use, I fancy. I never knew that it went so far abroad, but it comes in handy now. And then later on, when they're talking about the nature of the orcs that they've been facing in battle and how they seem to be half orc, half man, they talk about the fact that it reminds them of the southerner that they saw in Bree.
Yeah, we had so many questions about that when we recorded that episode, and it's all answered here.
I mean, I think this pretty well confirms that person was some sort of half orc, half man.
Yeah.
Maybe more man than orc, but that not only was it the case that these Uruk-hai are like the result of like scientific experiments in Isengard of like mixing these breeds of creatures, and like just how deeply unnatural that is, and like how evil that is, and it shows Saruman's kind of depravity, but also just how far his reach has gone. He is meddling in Rohan. He is meddling in Mordor. He's, vying for some sort of alliance with Mordor, but he's also stretched all the way into the north and is sending his people up there. Let me just read a little bit here. basically they say that the orcs that they've seen, these Uruk-hai, remind them of the southerner that they saw in Bree, but they say only he was not so obviously orc-like as most of these. And Aragorn says, I thought of him too. We had many of these half-orcs to deal with at Helm's Deep. It seems plain now that the southerner was a spy of Sauron's. But whether he was working with the Black Riders or Saruman alone, I do not know. Because remember, it's after this southerner leaves that the Black Riders come into Bree, and that's why they have to be really sneaky in how they get out. But he says, it is difficult with these evil folk to know when they are in league and when they are cheating one another. So there's that theme of evil undoing itself again and again and again.
Yep. Yep.
So after this exchange, they're sitting in there smoking together, and this is where Aragorn gives them back their treasures that they let fall, starting with the 2 blades from the Barrow Downs and, of course, the brooch from Lothlorien that does not idly fall.
Pretty important that they get those blades back.
Yeah, I mean, these blades, I think it's really, Tolkien's attention to detail here is really impressive, because all the way back in the Barrow Downs, we learn about how they're damasked, which just means like folded over and over again, so you get the rippling pattern in the blade, and how they were made in Numenor to fight the Witch King of Angmar. Yeah, I think it's really masterful the way that Tolkien kind of like sprinkles in little facts about why these blades are important. And then, looking ahead, the 2 payoffs that come from these blades and why it's like so fortuitous that 1, they got them in the first place, but 2, that Aragorn had the foresight to keep them. And really it's just out of fidelity to his friends. He's like, these are important to them. I'm going to hold on to them in hope that we reunite with them. He doesn't do it knowing like, oh, these are going to be like turning points in the war.
Mm-hmm.
But Merry is able to use his barrow blade, which was made by the Númenóreans for the explicit purpose of battle with the Witch King of Angmar. So one of the only things that could ever hurt the Witch King of Angmar, he's able to use it to stab him in the back of the leg, which lets Éowyn defeat him in battle against all odds. But then Pippin gets to use his in the March of the Black Gate. He uses it to down a troll.
Yeah, right.
So they call him like Troll's Bane or something like that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
For the rest of his life. It's awesome. Right. But there comes this great line where Pippin's like, yeah, basically like, oh, it was a real wrench to let it go, which is such a great line.
Oh, the brooch, right?
The brooch, yeah. He goes, it was a real wrench to let it go. But there's this great line, which is what we started the podcast with today, of just Aragorn saying, one who cannot cast away a treasure at need is in fetters.
Oh, that's beautiful. We get a little bit of more clarity about the argument between the orcs of Barad-dûr and the orcs of Saruman, and what happens when they have the quarrel and split up. Aragorn suggests that Grishnak sent a message across the river after the quarrel.
Yeah.
And the Red Eye will be looking toward Isengard, but Saruman, at any rate, is in a cleft stick of his own cutting.
That's an interesting phrase. Had you ever heard that before? In a cleft stick of his own cutting? I think we can get the gist of it, which is basically saying like he's shot himself in the foot.
Yeah, he's between a rock and a hard place, right? He's there because of his own doing.
Saruman has really undone himself by betraying the good guys, and then by being in league with Mordor. But then by betraying Mordor, he has just sealed his own fate. Like by trying to get the ring on his own, he was in a desperate place where he really couldn't he couldn't come out on top. And his march on Rohan was really just kind of a last-ditch effort to try and get them out of the equation so that he could somehow get back in the good graces of Mordor. But we know that it was never going to happen. Even if he had won at Helm's Deep, that was never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And here, we get a little like further confirmation that the old man that they saw was Saruman.
Right.
Gimli says, we caught a glimpse of the old villain, or so Gandalf hints, on the edge of the forest. It was 5 nights ago.
Yeah, so now there's kind of establishing when did all this happen? Where were we when you were meeting Treebeard? Did we get the name of Treebeard's house in the Treebeard chapter, Welling Hall? It's kind of funny that they end up they go through this horrible experience with the orcs, and then they kind of end up at the hospital, like Welling Hall, like healing place, basically.
Oh, I love that.
That they get a chance to get well with Treebeard, and they drink this magic medicine or potion or whatever, and
that's great.
It causes them to grow. I love that name, Welling Hall. Take me to the Welling Hall.
And then they start now what I think is really the meat of the chapter, which is like, this has all been really a vehicle to bring us to the place where we could learn what happens when the Ents march on Isengard.
Yep.
And it seems like, they have the rousing of the Ents that we see where they're making drum noises and they're blowing their horns and they're singing songs about how they're marching to destroy Isengard, and the cracking of the stones and the tearing down of the gates and all that. In the song, there's a little natural break, because when they get there, they see that the orcs are emptying out of Isengard, and they wait for the orcs to leave, and then that's when they attack.
Right.
And the description of the attack is so cool.
It is cool. I think the power of the Ents goes way beyond kind of what we would expect.
Yeah. I mean, it describes how they're just ripping and tearing, and, really the orcs just stand no chance. It would take many axe blows to bring down an Ent. And if you strike it once, you're not going to get a chance to strike it again, because if you get punched by an Ent, that the force of that punch could, crumple steel. It's just really beautifully described. But one thing that I put here, though, this is a question that I had, and I do think we should go back in a second and kind of talk about the description of the Huorns that we get.
Mm-hmm.
But Merry is like describing the destruction of Isengard. He goes, as soon as Saruman had sent off all his army, our turn came. Treebeard put us down and went up to the gates and began hammering on the doors, calling for Saruman. There was no answer except arrows and stones from the walls. But arrows are no use against Ents. They hurt them, of course, and infuriate them like stinging flies. But an Ent can be stuck as full of orc arrows as a pincushion and take no serious harm. They cannot be poisoned, for one thing, and their skin seems to be very thick and tougher than bark. It takes a very heavy axe stroke to wound them seriously. They don't like axes, and then he goes on and on. How does he know all this about Ent anatomy? That they can't be poisoned? He seems to have like a really clear, he's like describing their skin.
They spent like 2 days with Quickbeam,
Yeah.
And I think
Quickbeam's like letting them know, like, hey, so we can't be poisoned. We're impervious to arrows.
That's my headcanon, is like they spend those couple days with Quickbeam, and Quickbeam is a more talkative Ent than most Ents, and Merry and Pippin are like never shut up, and so they're like asking. I think that whole time they're asking questions, and then they've also
poison.
Yeah.
What's what kind of damage can you take?
What's the deal with poison? Yeah. Then they're like part of this battle, and even though it says that the men and the orcs that are still there kind of just like wig out and leave, they've seen some arrows get shot, and maybe have seen somebody with an axe try to take it to one of these guys, and it maybe even Treebeard himself, and it just doesn't work out. But
yeah, they just get hurled to the air 60 feet or whatever.
Yeah, right, exactly. So they have that firsthand experience also.
Going back a couple pages, the Huorns are described in much greater detail. And we kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think it's worth reading a few of these descriptions at more length. When they're describing the movement of the forest, and it seems like the order of events is that they march to Isengard, they stop before they reach the gates. They see Isengard being emptied, and then Treebeard sends out some of the Huorns to aid wherever the orcs are going. He may not know
they're just
where they're going,
basically. Yeah,
they're just following behind, which explains why they got there as quickly as they did.
Right
after the Battle of Helm's Deep, they're there already, and I think that is like when we see, like when we hear before the Battle of Helm's Deep, Legolas gives a description of it looks like mist going over the mountains. There's like a darkness that's moving over the mountains. I think that's what we're seeing. Like that force has already left Isengard at that point.
Yeah. Yep.
And so he's seeing the kind of the rolling of the hills. That's the Huorns following this army of orcs. So Merry says, Though I could not see what was happening in the dark, I believe that Huorns began to move south as soon as the gates were shut again. Their business was with the orcs, I think. They were far down the valley in the morning, or at any rate, there was a shadow there that one couldn't see through. And so I think that's what Legolas saw with his, like, you know, long-seeing elf sight before the Battle of Helm's Deep. But these Huorns, which hobbit says this? Is this Merry? I believe it's, yeah, because Pippin told Merry to do all the talking, which I think is interesting. He says, like, I don't have a mind for details, so Merry will, you know, be the primary storyteller, and I'll kind of jump in.
Merry's kind of the leader of Merry and Pippin also. Maybe just because he's older.
We never say Pippin and Merry, do we?
No, it's always Merry and Pippin, and Merry is, like the older brother or something, you know?
Yeah. He's got a mind for maps, as we've well noted. But he goes, it was the Huorns, or so the Ents call them in short language, in quotations.
I love that short language. That's so good.
Treebeard won't say much about them, but I think that they are Ents that have become almost like trees, at least to look at. They stand here and there in the wood or under its eaves, silent, watching endlessly over the trees, but deep in the darkest dales there are hundreds and hundreds of them, I believe. There's great power in them, and they seem able to wrap themselves in shadow. It is difficult to see them moving, but they do. They can move very quickly if they are angry. And he says, you can stand still and, like, look up at the sky, and then when you look back down, you'll be in the middle of a forest that wasn't there before. Pretty scary stuff.
Scary. Very scary.
And he says, I should be terrified of meeting them if there were no true Ents about to look after them. And I underline true Ents because it's like, these aren't just trees. You know, they're formerly Ents that now are kind of like less capable and have less agency than they were before, but the Ents are able to kind of orchestrate their movements and turn them into this army of ghost trees. You know, it's terrifying.
Yeah, and they're always described as sort of having some, like, anger.
Yeah.
They've got anger at the orcs, certainly. But it also, I don't know, it seems like a more general anger also, where, you know, even Merry and Pippin are like, we didn't go in to those trees because it just seemed like a bad place to be. Of course, they also have the experience in the Old Forest, you know, which is kind of Huornish in its own way. So
we get a description of the wizardry of Saruman, like what makes Saruman so powerful, being his voice. And that, of course, is going to play very strongly next chapter. But Merry kind of speculates that maybe the wizardry of Saruman has been falling off lately.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And he basically says that he is a coward and that he doesn't have much courage without his slaves or his machines around him.
Can I read that part?
Yeah, go for it, dude.
His wizardry may have been falling off lately, of course, but anyway, I think he has not much grit, not much plain courage, alone in a tight place without a lot of slaves and machines and things, if you know what I mean. Very different from old Gandalf. I wonder if his fame was not all along mainly due to his cleverness in settling at Isengard. And Aragorn kind of corrects that. He's like, no, there was a time where he was really a great, you know, power person. But yeah, at some point over the years, he loses that character. I think the way that Merry describes it is so... I love the way that Merry describes that, saying that he doesn't have much grit.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have just much plain courage.
Yeah, he's not like Gandalf in that way.
But he's also not like anyone in the company in that way. Merry and Pippin have 10 times as much courage as Saruman does at this point.
Yeah, because I think Merry is kind of onto something, because he's always just kind of holed up in Isengard. You know, Gandalf is a wanderer. He's a rolling stone.
Yeah.
He doesn't gather moss. Saruman has started to gather moss. You know, he's relying too much on his defensive position in this place of power and strength. And he's sending off other people to do his dirty work for him.
Right. And we even know that he doesn't even go into Fangorn to talk to Treebeard anymore. And Treebeard is his neighbor, you know?
He's right there. Yeah.
And so, yeah, Merry really I think, hits the nail on the head. I think he's not got much grit.
Yeah. Just calling him a coward.
Yeah.
But Aragorn warns them, and I think we're going to see this just in a few pages, that he has power over them, over weaker minds, which is most people. He has a power of command. His words are a spell that enchants people. He daunts them. That's a word that kind of comes up a lot. He has a daunting voice, which means that he's able to kind of subjugate people to his own will and kind of make them think that what he's saying is true, and maybe even have them think that it comes from their own mind. Like it's like they're hearing something that they themselves have always believed but weren't able to articulate. Aragorn also says that his thought is subtle, his knowledge is deep, and his hands are marvelously skilled. There's a sense that he is a crafty person. He's able to make things. And clear back in the Council of Elrond, which feels like years ago now, Gandalf says that when he pulled up to the gates, the steps of Isengard, he has a ring on his finger. And he refers to himself as no longer being Saruman the White, but being Saruman of many colors, ring maker. And so he's been studying the ring for millennia. He's been looking for it actively. We find out in the Unfinished Tales that he had found the body of Isildur in the river where he had been shot, exhumed his body, and tried to find the ring that way, and that he had crafted his own ring, sort of in mimicking the power of Sauron to create a ring of power. And it goes right along with what Treebeard said about him. He's trying to become a power. He's trying to become one of the Valar. He's trying to become stronger than his station or his natural place. He's getting too big for his britches.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of his character too. He's able to persuade people. He's able to daunt them with his voice, but he's also just he makes things, and so his wheels of industry, his fires that are constantly burning, it's part of his desire to control the world through his craft and his intellect.
That's something that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, unites or is a common characteristic or theme between Sauron, and Morgoth.
Yeah.
That they're all artificers, or they all are one of the gifts that they have is creation, or I guess, what is properly kind of this sub-creation that we've talked about before, Tolkien seeing himself as a sub-creator, that his desire to create comes because God is a creator. Yeah. But for Morgoth and Sauron and Saruman, that gift, that goodness, that characteristic that they have gets placed above all else, right? Yeah. And becomes a way, instead of being in that sort of stratus as a sub-creator, becomes the sort of highest good for each one of those characters. And then they use that ability to dominate and to gather more power to themselves.
There's a thin line between creating as an act of worship of God, who is a creator, and creating as an act of trying to be God.
Yeah, the act of ego, or
Two of the people that you just mentioned, both Saruman and Sauron, back in Valinor, before they came over to Middle Earth, when they had different names and different visages about them, they were students of the Valar Aule, who is a maker, and he is the one who made the dwarves. Right. And there's this great myth in Tolkien's Legendarium that Aule made the dwarves in secret, and God, Eru, comes and sees these, little guys that the Aule has made, but they're like automatons. They can't exist outside of his will. They don't have a will of their own. They don't have personalities. They don't have souls. And Eru is like, hey, why'd you do this? You know, like this wasn't part of the plan. You know, these weren't like what basically like what I laid out or what we discussed, what we made together in the Song of Creation. And Allie's like, I just wanted to be like you, Dad. You know, like I wanted to be a maker like you. I wanted to be a creator. And in his like fidelity to God, he raises his hammer and he's going to smash these things that he made. But when he goes to do it, the dwarves lift their hands above their faces and they cower in fear. And he realizes that they now have like personalities. And Eru's like, son, you know, I'm really proud of you. You did a good job. I'm really proud of this, like, you know, soapbox derby car that you made. And I've decided that I'm going to make these like little guys like real. Right. And they're going to go to sleep for a while. But like once my children wake up, I'll let them wake up and let them have their own souls, essentially. So they're almost like God's adopted children, the dwarves. Moving ahead, we find out for sure that the reason why the river Isen was emptied when the King's Company crossed last chapter is because the Ents had diverted it and dammed it and, you know, basically moved it into Isengard and flooded these like kind of subterranean workshops and bellows and, you know, turning wheels and, you know, God knows, breeding grounds, whatever. They have now just been like flushed out by the power of the river. And I think this theme just kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, which is that the marching of the Ents is really like the triumph of nature over industry that usually takes place over hundreds of years. You know, nature will come behind us and clean us out over the course of like a long time, but it's almost like a sped up, catalyzed version of that.
Yeah. What's more powerful than roots and water, you know? Over time, nothing.
There's a great German proverb, which is the constant dripping of water will break the stone. And I think that this is just a sped up version of that. It cleans, it cracks, it resets the score over time.
Yeah.
The hobbits recount the return of Gandalf. And it's so Gandalf. You know, they think that he is dead. They have no idea of his, you know, his return. And they're just, you know, kind of sitting in the detritus of this battle among the Flotsam and the Jetsam. And who comes up but Gandalf?
Sorry. I was so caught off guard last night reading this. Or yesterday, I guess. I actually sat under a tree while I read this, and I was so caught off guard by this line. Suddenly a great horse came striding up like a flash of silver. It was already dark, but I could see the rider's face clearly. It seemed to shine. It seemed to shine, and all his clothes were white, and I just sat up staring, with my mouth open. I tried to call out, and I couldn't. There was no need. He halted just by us and looked down at us. Gandalf, I said at last, but my voice was only a whisper. Did he say, hello, Pippin, this is a pleasant surprise? No, indeed. He said, get up, you tomfool of a took. Where in the name of wonder in all this ruinous Treebeard? I want him, quick. Gosh, it's so Gandalf.
He's like, I ain't got time for your joy at my return.
Yeah. And he says, later on, he says, wherever I have been, I'm back.
I love that.
So he sums up everything that happened to him in those, 6 words or whatever, 7
Wherever
words.
I've been, I'm back. Yeah, that's great.
But news must wait. This is a perilous night, and I must ride fast. But the dawn may be brighter, and if so, we shall meet again. He's kind of referring to like the dawn at Helm's Deep, I think.
Yeah. Take care of yourselves and keep away from Orthanc. Goodbye. So he still has some tenderness for them.
I think he takes Treebeard aside, and
yeah, they have like a council.
Yeah, and then Treebeard, after Gandalf leaves, Merry says, evidently he'd learned a lot in a short time and was digesting it. He looked at us and said, well, I find that you're not such hasty folk as I thought. You said much less than you might and no more than you should. So Gandalf tells him about the ring, almost certainly.
Yes.
And Treebeard's like, wow, those little hobbits didn't tell me about the ring.
Yeah, they got tight lips. I love this line. He goes, this is a bundle of news and no mistake. A bundle of news and no mistake. That's pretty good.
I love it.
I found the saucepan line that you mentioned earlier.
Oh, where's that?
So they break the dams that they've made and the waters flood, and there's great explosions and gusts of fire, and a coil of vapor goes whirling up and twisting around Orthanc until it goes up a mile into the air, and it goes, and still more water poured in until at last Isengard looked like a huge flat saucepan, all steaming and bubbling.
I love that.
Good catch.
Yeah, really good.
Underline that.
It's really dramatic.
Yeah, I think the explosions. I mean, how many explosions would the hobbits have heard in their life?
I mean, none, right? I mean, ever.
Says Saruman is still in his tower. There was a noise in the night like a wind coming up the valley. I imagine that's the Huorns. I think the Ents and Huorns that had been away came back then, but where they have all gone now, I don't know. So that was. Do you remember when they have the bivouac and the mists of the Huorns move past the king's company? I think that's what he's describing here. And he goes, it was a misty, moisty morning when we climbed down and looked around again, and nobody was about. And that is about all there is to tell. It seems almost peaceful now after all the turmoil, and safer too somehow since Gandalf came back. I could sleep! !
That's the best line in the book. It was a misty, moisty morning.
That's great.
Misty,
That's
moisty.
Great.
I need to start incorporating that into my vocabulary.
And now my favorite part of the whole chapter, we're coming towards the end here. They recount the return of Wormtongue, who seems to have only really just beat this company in arriving at Isengard. And Wormtongue just goes and is just, staring, mouth gaped at this destruction. And he tries to get away, but Treebeard takes like 3 big strides and just like plucks him off his horse and holds him for questioning.
He's described as a queer, twisted sort of creature himself, which again reminded me of Smeagol.
Yeah. I think it's a great comparison. I'd never thought of those two being similar, but they are.
He just immediately starts lying. No one else would dare to ride through the open land so full of foul orcs, he said. So I was sent, and I have a perilous journey, and I'm hungry and weary. I fled far north out of my way, pursued by wolves.
It's like, I'm just so courageous that no one else was willing to take this message. And, Merry sees right through this.
Yeah, just I said to myself, liar.
Yeah. But Treebeard's having out of it. He's like, I was expecting you, Master Wormtongue. He knows his name.
Mm-hmm.
Gandalf got here first. So I know as much about you as I need, and I know what to do with you. Put all the rats in one trap, said Gandalf, and I will. I am master of Isengard now.
Epic.
But Saruman is locked in his tower, and you can go there and give him all the messages you can think of. But my messages are useless now. He's like, I know.
He completely changes. He's like, oh, no, don't lock me in the tower with.
Please let me go away. And he goes, you got 2 choices, my dude. Either you sit here with us and you wait for Gandalf to arrive, which is going to happen pretty quick, or you can swim across this Flotsam and Jetsam and go back to your master, which will you have?
And it kind of continues that choice that Theoden gives Wormtongue.
Yeah, stay with me and help, or
you can either stay with me or you can leave. And then here again, it's kind of like, your choice is going to be your own downfall.
Yeah.
Like, you are judging yourself by your own actions.
Yeah. We don't need to judge you. You can show us.
It's not Theoden. It's not Gandalf. But he always chooses the wrong thing every single time.
Yeah.
I love this line where Treebeard says, "You know the way," and Wormtongue's like, "Well, how am I going to get over there? I can't swim."
Yeah.
And Treebeard's like, "Well, the water isn't deep. It's dirty, but that won't harm you, Master Wormtongue, because
You're dirty enough.
you're dirty enough already.
You already look like in terrible shape."
Right, you can't get any dirtier than you are, so."
Treebeard tells Merry and Pippin to prepare for the people who are coming. He goes, "I will ask you two lads to keep a watch at the gate for the folk that are coming. There will be the Lord of the Fields of Rohan, mark you. You must welcome him as well you know how. His men have fought a great fight with the orcs. Maybe you know the right fashion of men's words for such a lord better than Ents." He goes, and you mentioned this earlier, "There have been many lords in the green fields in my time, and I have never learned their speech or their names. They will be wanting man food, and you know all about that, I guess. So find what you think is fit for a king to eat if you can."
You know all about that, I guess. I forgot to mention that Merry and Pippin have already eaten, and then they serve their friends, Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli.
And they start eating again.
And then they sit down and eat again.
It kind of reminds me of, do you remember when they finally make it into Buckland and Mary's like, "Have you eaten?" And he's like, "Yeah, but we could have another."
Yeah, and then they're like, "Well, we can't, we have to be polite to our friends. We can't just, sit here." And Legolas is like, "Yeah, even if we hadn't shown up, you guys would have had another meal, don't you think?"
This is a great little bit of foreshadowing from Aragorn. They kind of speculate, like, I wonder what Wormtongue's up to up in that tower. Aragorn says, "Fate has not been kinder to him than he deserves. The sight of the ruin of all that he thought so strong and magnificent must have been almost punishment enough. But I fear that worse awaits him." And yeah, worse is coming for Wormtongue.
Sure is. I don't think we should spoil what happens to Wormtongue and why.
That'll be well covered.
But we'll get there.
And the chapter ends with one more little bit of foreshadowing about the fact that Saruman has been meddling in the Shire. Gimli says, "We understand it all perfectly now," but Aragorn says, "All except one thing. Leaf from the south farthing in Isengard. The more I consider it, the more curious I find it. Neither goods nor folk have passed that way for many a long year, not openly. Saruman had secret dealings with someone in the Shire, I guess. Wormtongues may be found in other houses than King Theoden's." And that's how the chapter ends. Thank you so much for reading along with us this week. Next week, we will pick right back up with Book 3, Chapter 10, The Voice of Saruman, when we meet Saruman for the very first time in person, if you can possibly believe it.
Yeah.
576 pages into my edition, we finally are in the same place as Saruman. We get to hear his voice. If you enjoyed the podcast, share it with a Lord of the Rings fan in your life. Be sure and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can see our faces on YouTube if you want to follow our YouTube channel. We would very much appreciate that. And we especially love it when you write comments on our YouTube videos. If you have something you'd like to share with us, you can email us at info@waywardwizards.com and go to waywardwizards.com for more info.
And until next time, have a misty, moisty morning.
We'll see you next week.
Bye. Whereas the Huorns,
Sure.
the treemen,